These days, there are very few games I'd happily sit and play non-stop until I started hallucinating, but I only just recently got stuck into Come Deliverance, and it must be said I now view it as one of those games. I have to make a confession, I did play it for a few hours when it released, but I didn't understand the game, and that was entirely my own fault, and I kind of rage quit and forgot about it. Now, 8 years down the line, I can say with certainty that bloody-mindedness robbed me of a jewel. Post having gotten detrimentally addicted to this game, it's gone from something I viewed as not for me, rapidly to something I now view as one of the most memorable gaming experiences going. As for its niche that I once viewed as prohibitive to my enjoyment of it, that became the main source of my fun. Okay, it was the secondary source of my fun. The main source was Farkle, of which I now unregrettably possess 1 terabyte of footage. But what I'm trying to say is Come Deliverance was right, and whatever I came away with from my misfire few hours playing it back in 2018, I was wrong. I can't absolve it of all of its frustrating aspects, but most of them feel like they're contributing to a point. And thanks to how frustrating the early game is in particular, learning to play the game properly is a satisfying experience within itself. This is a phenomenal game, and I wanted to do a video on it despite being 8 years late to that particular party, before I jumped headfirst into its sequel, of which I've heard nothing but great things about as well, and hopefully I should only be a year and a bit late to that one. But to appreciate it fully, I felt it best I go to Come Deliverance and first experience this game and all its glory from the very beginning, struggle my way through bohemian peasantry as I inhabit the life of a man who can destroy a chicken with a single punch. But when it comes to quite possibly anything else, he's hopeless, and we have to look after him. So what kind of value does this game bring? What does it offer that's unique? What does it bring to the table that makes Come Deliverance such a spectacular game? Well, join me, and let's find out. An important starting point for understanding Come Deliverance is what it's trying to be. It's an RPG set in a medieval world where you gallivant across the countryside and do quests, but where it deviates from most of its like is that it's not a fantasy. Come Deliverance is made with historical accuracy and believability in mind. The game is set in Bohemia in the year 1403, and while the narrative is fictional, it deals with historical events from that time and place. While there are other games that do a similar thing, what makes Come Deliverance different again is the fact that it doesn't embellish. I mean, it probably does, but certainly not to the extent of the likes of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Odyssey, Origins, other games that try to be historical RPGs, but embellish to the point where they become fantasy. The embellishment in Kingdom Come is much more subtle. Warhorse Studios want us to believe this world. I'd be cautious to use the word realistic, after all, it's still a game, but the game's intention is to slap us in 15th century Bohemia and see what happens. There is a fantasy being serviced, but that's a very different application of the word fantasy itself, and the world doesn't exist to service it, it exists to be itself. And because believability is the entire point of the game, that's how it's serviced. We are meant to believe this is what this region looked like at this point in history, and the game isn't trying to offer us more, strengthening that as the offer itself. There's no running off into the woods and finding things that wouldn't believably have been there, therefore the woods are just woods. That doesn't mean nothing is there, it just means what is built on what should be. Whatever we go and find, whatever we see, whatever activities we might engage with within the game, conform to acceptable confines that don't obstruct the subversive intention to be undramatic as a statement, reinforcing the backbone of the game. Kingdom Come has plenty of action and drama, but that's built from a very different feeling platform to what dominates the broader gaming market. It plays into its more noticeably grounded nature, and fashions that into a strength as much as a niche. It can be seductive for AAA games especially to seek mass appeal. After all, they're very expensive to produce, and you can't really afford for them to flop. That's especially true for a game that began life as a Kickstarter, even if a successful one. Its bravery to be its own thing then is commendable, and its success for that gamble is satisfying. The game spotted a gap in the market. If nothing else, it can be respected. But it's how the game delivers on its promises that makes it so memorable. But to do that, we need a vessel. And what better example than Henry of Skalitz? We play as the peasant son of a blacksmith who, at the start of the game, sees his parents cut down and his village razed to the ground. We begin our journey as an unskilled nobody from nowhere. A man on a quest for vengeance who can't fight, can barely hold the bow, never mind fire it, has the charisma of a lamppost and can't even read. Henry isn't your ordinary level 1 RPG character who's well-rounded and at least competent at anything you can try. He's a pathetic, bumbling bohemian bumpkin with no skills aside from the startling ability to obliterate chickens. There is no beginning more humble. Unlike Skyrim or The Witcher, we aren't blessed with initial stats in every department that basically makes the game a power fantasy from go. Henry is very much so a man whose station hasn't afforded him the opportunity to learn the skills he'll later come to rely upon. As such, he needs looking after, and that's where the player comes in, because he's completely out of his depth. Before we can worry about leveling our skills, we need to ensure that Henry survives long enough to acquire those skills to begin with, forming a very punishing opening few hours. Henry is repeatedly humbled and disrespected. He's a worthless whelp we must find a way to forge into a warrior, and beyond that, a rounded adventurer. The question becomes, how do we achieve that when a one-on-one encounter with a moderately equipped bandit could mean death? The answer, of course, is practice. And a bloody lot of it. The early game is a challenge, but its intention is not to have you stare at the death screen over and over again. The game isn't set up in a way that suggests headbutting insurmountable challenge repeatedly is viable. It has survival elements. Henry needs to eat, he needs to sleep. If you fail to do either of those things, your proficiency will be greatly hampered. On top of that, the save system doesn't allow you to bomb a save anywhere just before a dangerous encounter. In order to save, you need to sleep in a bed you own or consume savior schnapps from your inventory, a finite supply. Go long enough without saving in either of these two ways, when you die you could lose hours of progress. Factor this into the challenge of combat in particular in the early game. It's very obvious that the game doesn't want you taking on challenges you aren't ready for. It wants you to nurture Henry and hone those skills to the point where you are. Provided you know where to look, it gives you all of the tools to accomplish that. You have to build a routine alongside your skills, because without doing that you're relying entirely on luck. After all, it's a coming-of-age story. Henry has to earn his place in the world, and as he does that, the player is earning the right to play the game. And that's a satisfying journey to share. We begin our combat training completely outclassed by Captain Bernard. Stick with it and you're bullying him in the corner. The progression system isn't limited to an arbitrary level and stats. Perks built upon a foundation that's already there. The foundation is a part of the progression system, therefore, development in Henry's abilities, whether it be combat, stealth, lockpicking, drinking, yes, there's a drinking skill, it's noticeable. Success off the back of the dedication it takes to become proficient in the game grants the player a sense of pride, not just in yourself for sticking with it, but this blot of pixels that was once incompetent at everything. The coming-of-age story is legitimized by the fact the player is actively involved in it from the very beginning. Henry's triumphs are our triumphs. His survival is our survival. His chickens are our chickens. His Farkle wins are our Farkle wins. We can take a greater degree of ownership over Henry of Skalitz than we can with the likes of Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher, for instance, because he is entirely moulded by us. There may be a set character in the mix, but everything he can do and be is the result of our virtual blood, sweat, and physical tears. And that's one hell of an advantage in making an experience memorable. The difference in how the game plays between the start and end of the experience is the reward. You begin to relish in all of the systems that once frustrated you. It isn't a hard game by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it can be if you don't approach it methodically, but it's a game that consistently requires the player to be logical and mindful. And that's where I went wrong with it when I first tried it in 2018. I didn't consider that it needed to be approached as a slow burn. And now that I have 200 Farkle wins later, all the praises I've heard people sing for this game over the years suddenly made sense. It isn't about challenge, it's about the player paying attention and being involved. It'll penalise you if you aren't, but if you are, it rewards you. And I'm at a point now where I'd take that over a hack and slash-a-thon any day. But it's all well and good for a game to force the player to be attentive. The game still needs to be fun, it needs to capture the player's attention. Make that initial struggle worthwhile. We'll itemise the gameplay properly in a moment, but for the time being, I'd like to talk about something else the game has going for it. After all, no single player experience is complete without a good story, and it certainly makes a decent stab in that department. I wouldn't want to rehash the story in its entirety and make the video 2 hours long of just establishing context before I say anything worthwhile. God knows I've done that before. And I have already gone over what makes Henry compelling as a playable character, but what about as a narrative fixture? After all, it's his story, his journey from the son of a blacksmith, unskilled and impotent, being ragged around by whomever has the most experience and the biggest sword, to an absolute war machine the average peasant will confuse for a knight. This is a massively character-driven narrative. It needs a strong main protagonist, or it's all going to fall apart. If we can't buy into a hero's journey, what is the point? With that in mind, Henry is a fantastic protagonist. It's interesting that this realism-oriented medieval knight game would have us play as a peasant, somebody with limited potential of becoming a knight. After all, at face value, that sounds like it clashes with the game's bid for historical accuracy or fidelity. In failing that, medieval European feudal class systems were pretty rigid. But you know what? It's a stroke of genius on two accounts. The first being it creates the biggest gap between the beginning and end within the progression system, which we've already gone over. The second is that again from a strictly storytelling point of view. After all, this is an anti-fantasy. Henry fantasizes about adventure himself. As the apprentice to his father, Martin, he daydreams about venturing off into the world, making a name for himself, becoming a renowned swordsman. Therefore, the experience the game provides us with correlates with the experience the story provides Henry with. He fantasizes about bravado and valor, but when Skalitz is sacked, his parents are cut down, he's forced to flee. He's powerless. The opening few hours of Come Deliverance show Henry being sobered up to the reality of the cruel world he occupies, a world indifferent to him. He survives his first few brushes with death only by immense luck, and even then he sustains an unhealthy amount of injuries. He's caught up in events beyond him, his parents just casualties. He's only the protagonist of his story. From everyone else's perspective, he's just Henry, if they care to learn his name at all. I would argue that does shift later in the story to a point, but the opening few hours are dedicated to highlighting exactly how unimportant he is. He's exposed to the class system of the day and reminded what separates him from the lords. He is the embodiment of nobody. His personal mission is to achieve vengeance and reclaim his father's sword that was stolen from him, the last one he ever forged, for Sir Radzig, who reigns on that parade almost immediately. He isn't particularly asked about a sword, he's lost his castle after all. But a statement is made. Henry is on his own in this big bad world. He alone cares for the extremities of his personal mission. As for his notions about how the world works, they're entirely dispelled. Much like our notion of what the game's going to be like is dispelled if we're expecting it to be like any bog-standard power fantasy RPG on the market. We and Henry both need to prepare ourselves, equip ourselves for whatever this world might throw at us. Otherwise, it'll chew us up and spit us out. We're nobody special, and part of the early stages of Henry's coming-of-age story is learning that devastating lesson before it devastates him. He needs to become more than a stubborn, determined peasant to survive. Yet that very stubbornness is his greatest strength. It's what molds him against the odds, from an incapable country boy few have faith in, to a dependable force in this land. It is what ingratiates him to his so-called betters, and ultimately that unrelenting drive pushes the narrative forward. That very core character trait, his motivations and mission, therefore align with the players, because our dedication to learning how to play the game is contributing to that story directly. We can therefore treat the story beats as our accomplishments. That isn't entirely unique, but it certainly resonates to a higher degree when your zero to hero story actually begins at 0 and not 50. Furthermore, Henry is a likeable character besides, provided you don't play him like a depraved serial killer like I did for the first few hours. There were no consequences of the people I murdered in Skalitz the first time. But to get back to the point, Henry's personality does regularly shine through. I'd even go so far as to say he feels like an authentic person, both when taking into consideration the roundedness of his broader personality and his casting. The range of situations Henry finds himself in necessitates he has a very adaptable demeanour. RPG Protagonist 101, I suppose. Early in the story, he's stubborn and naive, and the plot does gradually cure the naivete to a point. But there are so many other sides to him depending on the situation. His sense of humour's a strong point, and oftentimes that doesn't necessarily manifest in jest, but rather appropriate or sometimes inappropriate responses to what's going on. Sometimes he's simply amusing in how he bumbles his way through confusing conversations. Other times it manifests in expression. For instance, glancing around a monastery with a look that screams, "How the bloody hell did I get here?" Other times it manifests in unbridled shenanigans. Other times it's perfectly timed lines calling upon the absurdity of the situation.
What was that woman on about? Before my flock eats me alive. I've forgotten something. What have I forgotten? Where the fuck am I?
Humour is perhaps the most human trait. Once we get past the 2 legs, 2 arms, a bit of hair if you're lucky, and a nose, I suppose. What I mean is, one way or another, it's something everybody has. It's a primary method through which we can interface with others, and Henry is no different. If we want to believe a person is real, we need to observe them navigating complex social dynamics, and even with the most serious characters, there's no better way than displaying their humour, or perhaps amusing aspects about them. Come Deliverance has a wicked sense of humour in general, so it's no shocker that Henry has this aspect down. He is a lovable buffoon, a man who rolls with every situation as his life gets increasingly absurd to his blacksmith sensibilities.
Pater noster quis incarnis sanctificator omen tuum.
Are you sure you're saying that right?
Shh! Mustn't be interrupted. Ave Maria, gratia, plenty, dominatrix tecum.
But he isn't always a fumbling idiot, or even most of the time. He's simply relatable, and that makes it easier to identify with Henry in more serious and solemn situations, where the man he's becoming shines through. We find ourselves rooting for him. He's an underdog, one that refuses to stay down for long. He may be a rounded, naturally ridiculous human, but if anything, that doesn't hamper his serious story, it enhances it. He's no overdramatic, gruff action hero. He possesses the realistic dynamism of an actual person, and that makes his inevitable triumphs in the face of events outside of his control feel earned. And we can take full ownership over that, understanding where Henry has come from, having been with him from his journey's very beginning. Every piece of world wisdom he obtains is a victory for us, and because we see every side of him, we look after him, we keep him clean, we keep him fed, we keep him rested, we're responsible for ensuring he's adequately trained. The game seamlessly has us assume his very life. The player's motivation for caring for Henry is because the player is Henry, and what we and Henry share in common is we're normal people. There's nothing inherently special about us or him. We aren't God-selected chosen ones, or highly trained mutant monster slayers. Like we just are and occupy our world as such, Henry's distinction from the characters he meets is also fine. He's a part of this world, not just a vehicle to travel through it. On top of that, another layer to his believability is his casting. Henry is performed excellently. Being a bumpkin, he isn't going to sound like lords. They speak with an upper-class distinction, or as I like to refer to it, a more generic English accent. Of course, they aren't speaking English at all. It's just translated for our benefit, but oftentimes they speak with a cleanliness. If Henry sounded like them, it would ruin the distinction being made. So instead, Henry has a voice more fitting, using some variety of erotic Southwest English accent with a gentle lisp. Being originally from the West Country myself, I'm quite fond of a West Country accent. Even I associate it with a straightforward rural life, and hot fuzz. Hearing it transports me back to the countryside amid Devon, driving down country lanes barely wide enough for my car. Praying to whatever god might be out there I don't encounter a tractor coming the other way. Henry doesn't have that accent nor dialect. It's more generally rustic English, but I felt a sense of familiarity with it nonetheless. To my sensibility, it's the voice of a commoner, somebody from as far away from the political heart of a country as possible. Therefore it suits the son of a village blacksmith down to the ground. It creates a voice I wouldn't associate with an action hero, making it perfect for a game with realism at its heart. Henry's a normal guy, and the game has such an impressive attention to detail in ensuring that's felt. I often find protagonist voices to be unrealistically refined, to the point where they don't necessarily slot into their environment. Here it feels care has gone towards the opposite to ensure that Henry sounds like his voice could belong to an ordinary NPC. The best way to put this is we have to make him special. After all, that's the philosophy of the game. Having a character that embodies that is crucial. The character isn't immediately iconic, we need to bond with him. In a game we similarly have to bond with, that's an inspired pairing. It brings authenticity to the character, enhancing the story's many sincere moments. And Henry is not the only fantastic character Kingdom Come offers. What else could you expect from a game that guest stars Brian Blessed as a paranoid engineer? Paranoid with a point, evidently, but paranoid nonetheless. This game has many characters whose company I would deem enjoyable. The larger-than-life Sir Hanush, the petulant but ultimately decent Sir Hans, the debauched alcoholic man of the cloth Father Godwin.
Well, I have to say that was a fine evening.
The suspiciously fatherly Sir Radzig Cobbler. Can't go far wrong with Teresa. The war-hardened Sir Robard, the sceptical but bold Captain Bernard, whom I enjoy kicking the daylights out of more than the company of his character necessarily, but you know what, sod it. Kingdom Come has many engaging and interesting characters who function in ways that contribute to Henry's growth, not all of whom are immediately likeable, but are established as a platform from which Henry can bond with. Realistically, this is balanced against a backdrop of characters who aren't all like this. Not every character needs to be interesting, nor does Henry need to foster a relationship with them beyond the basic rapport that comes with the reputation system. Yet that doesn't mean there aren't many more characters who are memorable. That distinction, of course, extends to the antagonists. I like that Runt the bandit that stole Henry's father's sword doesn't even remember him at first. It shows he doesn't just exist exclusively to be Henry's villain. Placing emphasis on a world that existed before, will exist after, and exists around the story being told, and the notion that the narrative was kicked into motion by events beyond any of the characters' control. I like the sophistication of this Van Toth. He's a menacingly cunning tactician to whom Henry's mission is of limited consequence. Eric is kinda just there, but serves as an extension to Toth. He's a person Toth actually cares for, and that allows us to see his human side, despite having limited opportunity to do so. More than anything though, I like this story doesn't get caught up too much with its villains. The plot instead is focused on Henry's personal journey. Its emphasis on dispelling idealized fantasies of what the Middle Ages were like without turning it into Game of Thrones. In this respect, it is neither cynical nor romanticized. It carefully navigates the complex politics of the time, and Henry's place in that is not as some great saviour, nor as some particularly important figure otherwise. These are the times Henry occupies. This is the world he has to find his place in, and discover who he truly is. The world doesn't bend to him, and his actions have isolated consequences. It's a story about him adapting to it. Because it comprehensively fulfills that promise, the story earns the right to be open-ended, to leave vengeance for a sequel. The boy became a man, and it's that man that rides forth. An enjoyable narrative all round, as I've vaguely outlined, but it isn't without its flaws. For instance, the cutscenes are most certainly a strength. There are many stunning visuals. When there are proper cutscenes on display, it's clear this game has cinematic flair. I have to say, what it struggles with is integrating dialogue into those cutscenes. More specifically, dialogue options with its beautiful scenes. As a result, these proper cutscenes are frequently followed up with a non-cutscene where the dialogue can then be exchanged and the player can choose the options that feel most appropriate. I think I understand there's a technical limitation at play, but it is somewhat jarring. I wouldn't say it's anything unique to Kingdom Come, and it doesn't harm the quality of the product at all, but that layer of disconnect between the proper cutscenes, the dialogue options, and the gameplay itself does create a reliable stiffness. That being said, if I'm splitting hairs over this, it's a compliment to how Warhorse Studios handled everything else. After all, it's not lost on me this was their first ever release. To shift on to discuss how this game plays, where could I begin other than with the combat? It relies on a system inspired by historical European martial arts, and with realism at the forefront in this game, early on especially, it can be quite cock-handed. With some patience and study, Henry can become a master of it. I do think it's probably a stretch to say this combat system thrives, but there's boundless fun to be had here. The fundamentals are very straightforward. You strike your enemy and you choose the direction the swing comes from, and hope it doesn't get blocked. Then you block and hope that you have the stamina to hold your defense. At first it can be a tad awkward because the fundamentals seldom work on their own, and that is all you're provided with. You have to build up the rest of your skill set. This is not inherently bad, after all sword fighting should not come naturally to a novice. Success when equipped with the basics relies on a bit of luck, and Henry can only crudely deal with one opponent at a time. However, as you train and exercise your training on unsuspecting locals, you level and your stats grow. You get greater strength, greater vitality, greater agility, and of course you improve your abilities with the chosen weapon, allowing you to unlock perks that makes the combat more expansive, factoring combos. In the early game, every encounter Henry survives is a victory, but in this setup it's worth noting that Henry is exceptionally mortal and can be easily overwhelmed. That's why it's important to be armoured to ensure that Henry has the greatest chance possible. It also helps to be alert. If we're caught off guard at all, it could cost us. That's why in the early game it's essential to avoid scuffles wherever possible. It's a last resort option that needs further practice in the training ring. As tedious as it might seem, there's no avoiding training in a safe environment. And if you dedicate yourself to this modest arena for long enough, to the point where you can basically batter Bernard like he's a piñata, he'll teach us a technique that cuts the chance out of the equation: the Master Strike. What is a Master Strike? Basically, if you use it, you're probably going to win. The Master Strike is a variety of perfect block that automatically initiates a counterattack, and will likely leave your enemy open to more strikes. It is unblockable and most attacks can be repelled this way. Vice versa, enemies can use it on you. And they will. Almost every time. So this is going to become a mechanic you're going to use at the expense of much of anything else. There's a limited point to paying attention to the combos if you're more than likely going to be Master Struck out of it, so your best friend becomes patience in awaiting your Master Strike opportunity. This unfortunately does take a lot of the depth out of the combat system, so it's fortunate that even with the Master Strike under your belt, you still have to pay attention to your surroundings and avoid getting surrounded, because if you do, a band of renegades will make quick work of you. So at least there's something in the way of the Master Strikes making the combat a doddle, if not much. But the windows are so great and they're so easy to pull off in the heat of combat that they become more favourable to the likes of combos and feints that require a little bit more brains to pull off. And the risk of being on the receiving end of your opponent's Master Strike can make trying anything else seem silly, even if that can be negated with attack direction and feints. Of course, there's a science to pulling off feints, there's a science to the combos, there's a science to not getting Master Struck in combat so often, but you need to practice that to the point where it becomes muscle memory with Bernard, whereas clinching and Master Strikes require far less thinking and get the job done in no time flat. Unless your enemy is indecisive, of course. So if we're being pragmatic, what are we going to rely on in gameplay more? Is the average person going to tap into the depth of the combat system, use feints, dodges, clinches, Master Strikes, and well-timed combos in tandem? A minority will, for certain. But to the vast majority, the Master Strikes will be an excuse to not explore that depth. Evidently, this one-button solution is incredibly handy versus fiddly combos. The timing and patience required for feints, the stillness and calm required for dodges. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Master Strikes are a shortcut to making Henry competent at the combat, so many players will get a hold of that, and that'll be where their experimentation with the system ends. It is both the most effective and most reliable pathway to success. That, in my opinion, doesn't do justice to a combat system that can be so much fun. Not that no satisfaction whatsoever comes from pulling off a Master Strike necessarily. They can be quite aesthetically pleasant. There simply is an imbalance in their ease to pull off versus alternatives, and that stands in the way of what this combat system actually wants to be. That being said, it doesn't completely ruin everything or even close. There is still plenty of depth to be sapped out of the combat system, even including the Master Strikes. We have to ensure our weapons and armor are properly maintained to maintain their effectiveness. We need to maintain our stamina to avoid taking damage. If we take bleed damage, we end up on a clock before we bleed out, and we need to apply bandages after the fight to ensure that we don't. We have a modest selection of weapons ranging from long swords to short swords, maces to axes to hammers to bludgeons, shields to find what we're most comfortable with. Each weapon choice having its own perks and drawbacks. Then there's movement speed dependent on how much we have in our inventory and how heavily armoured we are. It's an RPG, so it's all about finding a balance, a system that works for you. And like I said before, when facing multiple foes, you need to use the terrain to your advantage. Look for obstacles, even if that happens to be your opponent's ally. He might even end up dealing with his mate for you. You have to actively concentrate on multiple foes at once, avoid getting surrounded, and fight like a lion because even maxed out you're still mortal. The functional cheese of a Master Strike or not, you will still be impressed and satisfied with what you can accomplish. Another detail worth considering are the helmets. Helmet or no helmet? What a dilemma. The helmet protects your face, but if it's a full face helmet, your visibility is greatly reduced. You have to weigh up visibility against protection. I did some parts of the game with a helmet on and some parts without. Eventually I got fed up with staring at this in dialogue, and prioritised being able to see Henry's face and Henry's face being able to see. There are open face helmets, but then I gave Henry a sick trim and actually wanted to see it from time to time. But yes, there's an awful lot to consider in the combat system, in building the perfect routine with it for you. But one area it does consistently actually struggle with, to be honest, is battle. Generally speaking, it's ideal for 1v1 encounters or otherwise confined confrontations, but the systems at play don't necessarily know what to do with themselves in the several battle occasions peppered throughout the story. The build up to these occasions get your blood pumping, that much is true, but the actual gameplay segments to them have a tendency to become a confusing, disorienting mess, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but because it's still using a combat system that chiefly prioritizes 1v1 confrontations, the AI disperses and battles become scattered 1v1 fights, except the AI swap enemies every so often. And if an enemy AI is focused on an ally of yours, they're more than happy to completely forget you're there stabbing them in the arse. So your greatest tactic here becomes, instead of using any form of mechanic whatsoever, you're just waiting for your opponent to get distracted. You no longer have to tap into the wealth of mechanics, just poke people until they fall over. What should be the highest stakes combat gets is now the safest arena, and it's not a case of safety in numbers. After all, formation becomes non-existent after a few seconds, but it is much easier to slaughter your foes when they appear to have left object permanence at home. These battles aren't common to the point of annoyance, but there's too much getting in the way of tapping into the combat's actual depth that one can't help but notice they're very far removed from the system's strengths. I can't necessarily knock the messiness of it all for being unrealistic, however I would say these occasions from an entirely gameplay perspective aren't awfully memorable. It's a good job the narrative beats make up for it. It's also a good job the instances of one-on-one confrontations far outweigh the big battles. The combat has a greater opportunity to thrive there. Moving on, what about fistfights? Stun lock your foe with the clinch mechanic on repeat and you'll be golden.
You'll never see my secret move.
I promise I have high opinions of this combat system, it just happens to be easy to cheese. You need to level up far enough and obtain the correct perks to cheese it reliably, and you have to be semi-competent without the Master Strikes for Bernard to even consider teaching them to you, so there's no avoiding exploring the combat a little bit, but it's still ultimately the biggest trouble Kingdom Come Deliverance's combat faces. You develop to a point of imbalance and the depth loses some value. Once you pass those choke points, the challenge of the early game becomes a memory. You can make your own life harder by trying to master the more complicated sides to the combat, but the game should consistently require you to do that anyway. Combine what you've learned recently with what you've mastered. It isn't terribly far off being that, but particular aspects don't play into the roundedness of it. They become convenient crutches the system doesn't need. Since I haven't played Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 yet, at least not properly, I'd be curious to see how they've rebalanced Master Strikes. Have they made them harder to perform, less dominant in your opponent's arsenal? Were I John Warhorse Studios post this game's release back in 2018? Going into a sequel, rebalancing that would have been my priority. Either way, I guess I'll be seeing sooner rather than later, won't I? Other gameplay systems include archery, which will have you tearing your hair out at first. Henry has no crosshair, his arm is very shaky. You are going to miss more than you are going to hit, but it's only through use that you'll see improvement. And even when Henry's archery skill improves, it still feels like a game of trial and error. You have no reticle. You have to be familiar with the archery system to be truly comfortable with it. Enter some archery contests. Play some chumps, get a feel for it. The ability to comfortably place an arrow is invaluable. The same can be said for the game's stealth systems. Lockpicking at first is agony. Just when I think games couldn't throw a more painful lockpicking system at me, Kingdom Come Deliverance shows up in my life. But unlike an actually painful lockpicking system, Henry can get skilled at this. If you get good at it, you get faster, and if you get faster, you're less likely to be seen fiddling with keyholes. You start lockpicking for fun, sometimes even when you have a key, simply because it contributes towards leveling. Towards the lockpicking system getting easier. Pickpocketing is a system I didn't do much with. It's much easier to knock people out while they're sleeping and straight loot them, which levels up your stealth, so, as you can imagine, my reputation in the monastery's in tatters. It's their own bloody fault there's a room full of injured people with no awareness of their surroundings whom you can repeatedly knock out. I like the fact that you have to choke people out until you earn the right to perform stealth kills. It's also worth noting you have to be mindful of your clothing. Heavy armor is loud, clunky and visible. It's not going to aid you in evading detection. Another facet of gameplay is horsemanship. Over the course of the game, your ability to ride horses improves. This is perhaps the department where the difference between the beginning and end stats are quite negligible. Henry starts out halfway decent at riding, and all you really unlock are perks to increase Pebble's speed and carry weight, perhaps even make the horse less skittish, and if you need more than one horse can offer, you can always buy a new one. If you're like me, you'll feel horrible for betraying Pebbles like that and then do it anyway. Another fundamental to how this game plays are the survival elements. Henry can't just go forever. He needs to be regularly fed, he often needs sleep, he needs to be cleaned routinely, his clothes need repairing, his weapons need repairing. It all sounds a tad more tedious than it is in reality. Keeping some food on your person is absolutely advisable, but at the very least until you unlock the human dustbin perk, you need to make sure that food is viable when you eat it. It can't go off in your pocket. Then you report to the inventory and stuff your face till you're nourished. It occurred to me very early an easy way to do this is to kill chickens. Chickens die with one punch. They actually explode, but there are no consequences for killing them, nor are there for taking them. All you have to do now is cook the chicken and scran it. Though, if you don't pick them up, be mindful of the fact the game will give up despawning them. As a result, I have converted Rat-Eye into a series of chicken graveyards. I truly imagine that Henry does not blink as he annihilates chickens. As for sleep, you can combine this with saving the game if you sleep in a bed you're allowed to sleep in. Whether that be a bed you own or a now no longer occupied camp, or indeed parting with some of your hard-earned groschen for a room at the inn. You can pay 2 groschen for a night, or you can pay considerably more to keep the room permanently. Your life is going to be easier in general in both the sleep and nourishment department if you have money. So getting your hands on some groschen is going to be a priority. You can loot your fallen foes, take the money, take their valuables and sell them, but that's going to take time. You assume a lot of risk and you damage your equipment unnecessarily. So allow me to introduce you to a neat little trick that I like to refer to as gambling. This is Farkle and it constitutes about 50% of my footage. It's a dice game played with 6 die where your objective is to roll as many 1s and 5s as possible and reach a certain point threshold before your opponent. And if you do, you win.
Kurva! Why the hell did I even start playing?
It's a luck-based game, so you might lose occasionally. However, with some loaded die and a couple of perks, it becomes a lot harder to lose and a lot easier to win. Jesus Christ, this man has a family.
Why, oh why did they quit while I was ahead?
Because you never were. Farkle is truthfully only a gamble early on in the game. Later, it becomes something of an infinite money glitch. Betting 100 grosh in a time and then throwing down rigged die, you can guarantee yourself an income doing it. Chance may still be at play, but the wins will far outweigh the losses. And here is the bloody proof. I had way too much fun with this. Sometimes you've just got to batter a surf at Farkle. All you have to do is pull far enough ahead in points and watch the opponent's AI engage in what can only be encapsulated by the highly technical term shitting itself. And no matter how many times you clean them out, if they've still got money, they will keep going. I'm sure your luck will turn eventually, Derek. This time cannot possibly have the same outcome as the past 46. Oh, would you look at that? I might just be the first person to develop a gambling addiction without ever actually gambling a day in my life. I'm out here making sure the poor stay poor. If anything, the gentry should pay me. But the absolute best thing about Farkle is completely rinsing somebody's purse, watching them get up, now broke, wander off, and go blank somewhere evaluating their life choices. You can leave feeling like you've made an impact on that NPC's life. The kind of impact that cost him his home, but an impact nonetheless. Another essential aspect to making money is haggling. Haggle on what you sell, haggle on what you buy, haggle on training. Make sure every groschen goes as far as possible. For the best results, make sure Henry is clean and presentable, ensure his clothing is not damaged. Make sure to level your speech, ensure your charisma stat is as high as possible. The survival elements and the benefits for engaging with them roll into each other. Once you've got a routine going, it's easy enough to manage, and it was nowhere near as invasive as I initially feared, meaning you really don't have to dedicate too much time for it, and all of it can be incorporated rather seamlessly into playing the game besides. Another element to how the game plays that I fell in love with is the fast travel. In most games that have it, I find fast travel is so bland that it's basically glorified teleportation. You open the map, select a discovered location, and are immediately transported there. In fairness to most games, that's functional, and all they need. Kingdom Come Deliverance doesn't want to give you the peace of mind that you can just easily teleport to where you need to go. Yet it simultaneously understands the necessity of fast travel as a time-saving system. Therefore, the game has it. But fast travelling across the map isn't as straightforward as pointing, clicking, and going. We watch an icon representing Henry's position move through the world, and as we travel, there's every chance he might run into trouble. When that happens, we have the option to engage with that encounter or try to avoid it, which isn't always successful. Sometimes these journeys pass without incident, but other times it feels Henry can't go 5 paces without encountering something else. So, this fast travel system requires the player to be attentive. Provided you actually reach your destination, it is faster than travelling through the world, with Henry entirely under your control. But there's a definite risk of things not going entirely according to plan. This can of course be negated with certain perks, and not everything that might derail your mooch is immediately a threat, but there are potential consequences to using the fast travel system that have to be evaluated. However, it's rarely anything that can't be dealt with. If it's anything at all, I keep getting this bugged phone north of Ledechko that isn't actually there, but the game seems to think so. Then whenever I get to my destination, I get a reminder about the reputation system suggesting I have a bad reputation on the road northbound out of Ledechko in particular, and its whole population of 0 wants me dead. It's either that or Henry's schizophrenic, which wouldn't entirely surprise me. Silly blips aside, I love this game's fast travel system. All it needed to be was a glorified teleportation with a time jump, yet instead we're treated to a visual that reminds me a bit of Monty Python, which I say loosely, knowing it's not a novel thing to say at all. The map in general has an element of whimsy to it that I happen to appreciate, and these fast travel animations do bring it out more, because you can imagine music playing in your head as the guy goes. Look at him. Wandering. Dickhead. Had this been a simple fast travel system you've seen 1,000 times before in 1,000 different games, it wouldn't have been worthy of mention. But because it's one of few genuine fast travel systems that do keep the player involved, beyond spinning an image in a loading screen Bethesda, it doesn't ultimately manifest as an obstruction to the realism experience. That's not to say I use the fast travel system abundantly a lot of the time. I just find it's more helpful present than not, especially towards the back end of a quest when you are venturing back to where it began. You know, the point where the experience has been had and all that remains is to turn it in and get paid. With the added unpredictability of the system and the potential dangers that come with using it, it doesn't feel like you're bypassing game to skip to somewhere. Therefore, if you feel the need to use it, you can use it guilt-free. It becomes an extension to the immersion, not an interruption like it is in most games that have a fast travel system. All that being said, the novelty of it does wear off. Nevertheless, it's got more going for it than most fast travel systems I've ever seen do. Its utility is also tastefully limited, meaning you can only use it to travel to specific towns, villages. Essentially, if your destination lies well off the beaten path, it's going to be of limited use and may only be able to take you part of the way. I suppose that serves to maintain the fast travel's value as much as it does maintain the world's. If you're not using it all the time, you're not going to get fed up with it so easily, and you're also going to dedicate time to exploring what's out there. A world of simplistic beauty. A world that I will now proceed to ramble on about. If an open world game's beating heart isn't the open world itself, it has failed as an open world game. Whether it's a layered interactive playground or just simply a backdrop, this is the stage the rest of the game is built upon. Kingdom Come Deliverance portrays early 15th century Bohemia as a genuinely gorgeous place, and that's not achieved through overstating and exaggerating features to formulate a fantastical medieval world. After all, this is an anti-fantasy, a game centered around the concept of realism. The world itself needs to adhere to that very philosophy. Its very believability needs to stem from that idea. The grass can be green but not too green, the sky can be blue but not too blue, the tree line needs to look natural, this world needs to look inhabited. If we're to be convinced by it, we need to be transported to 15th century Bohemia. Everything needs to look natural, our suspense of disbelief needs to be constant. Nothing can be out of place for the sake of it being a game. And that is what this world is built on. It's an environment that could plausibly have existed in 1403 in our world exactly as seen in the game. There's nothing mythical nor magical about it, nor is there anything overbearingly cynical. The world believably just is. It's not even especially scaled down. With some liberties on placement, this map reasonably accurately depicts a modest parcel of countryside. The game has no interest in condensing a country into its map. It only has to encapsulate what it needs. It isn't compromising to accommodate scope. The world therefore feels much larger than it actually is because we can reasonably believe that from every edge and corner of it, it goes on forever. We simply have no reason to go that far. And that's an awful lot more believable than a much larger region being condensed to the point where it's portrayed as considerably smaller than it is. Instead, we're exploring a small region. And that helps confine Henry's journey to a very personal one, further hitting home just how beyond his control the events of the broader world are. That compounds against the realism aspect. Henry's journey is not to become a renowned countrywide hero. That just wouldn't be realistic. It would also be hard to believe Henry would be sent on far-flung adventures across the country so regularly. But condense the scope to a few close-together villages and a couple towns and the surrounding countryside, and suddenly you don't have to modify quest structure too far from the norm. Sometimes nullifying RPG tropes isn't about doing away with the trope, but ensuring the world suits the intent of the product. And sometimes it's hard to avoid a good fetch quest. If one end of the map to the other only takes a few in-game hours, and that lines up with the canon distance, suddenly the fetch structure is less offensive. I'm not using that to somehow sidestep into saying Kingdom Come Deliverance is dominated by fetch quests, though it does have its fair share. I'm simply drawing attention to the fact the world strikes a balance between ensuring there's a roving open-world RPG experience and still adhering to the principal promise of authenticity. In Kingdom Come's world's case, trying to capture too much could inhibit that. There is a limit to how big a game can be if it's to execute to that standard. Procedural generation would get in the way and you'd end up with loads of negative space and nothing really going on top of the plenty you naturally have. And then for that more to have meaning, you'd need to condense the map considerably, at which point you are making a trade-off you don't want to make. For the sake of needlessly bringing a game in line with Skyrim, you can successfully capture the floor of the world feeling too small, for no real benefit in any way that would matter for a game such as this. So instead, commendably, Warhorse Studios prioritized a tighter world, still big enough to be an adventure, especially to the mind of a 15th century peasant who likely never left his village, a world full of boundless natural beauty and endless discovery, a land full of people living their lives, living out their stories. Some stories overlap with ours, others don't. A world established as but a slice of a broader landmass, a broader political landscape. It is the corner of a world, not the heart of it. That bestows upon it credibility. Rolling comfortably into your imagination, you can believe this exists 100, if not 1,000, if not 10,000 times over, in every direction from where you're standing, regardless of whether or not you can then go and see it. That grants you a sense of adventure far greater than the adventure itself can. The world we experience may be contrived for the player's adventure. After all, it's a game, that's its objective purpose, but the experience can enable us to feel otherwise. And that's exactly how I feel about this world. It's gorgeous, it's glorious, it's a whole lot of fun to get lost in, but I don't necessarily feel as if it's just another game world. It's an enriching experience, not just as a gamer, but somebody fascinated by history. Come Deliverance displays an impressive attention to detail. I'm no expert on its setting as to declare judgment on its accuracy, but I'm led to believe it's reasonably impressive in that department. I like that many of the characters are historical figures, many of the events beyond the story referenced are real historical events. Many of the events in the story itself are also historically rooted. It moulds with the clay it has. Drafting up fiction in between the lines of the history books gives me a warm fuzzy feeling I can't possibly explain. And then of course there are the other world details that stick out to me. Supposedly the star map you see on a clear night is how it would have looked in 1403. Detail, even where it absolutely is not necessary, is the difference between goodness and greatness. Value can come from the simple act of looking up. They could have just banged some stars up there in no particular order and nobody would have noticed. Instead, you've got constellations, the North Star, the works. I also have a particular love for how the moon looks in this game. It's not exaggerated in size, nor is it especially dramatic, and that perhaps gives it more presence and drama, because the night sky in this game is removed enough from the vast majority of our contemporary experience. Light pollution is much more minimal. It's lovely. As for the content that awaits us in this world, of course, there's more to do than just the story, or just the training and the story, or just the gambling, training and story, as much as I can't help myself because playing dice has invaded my brain. There are side quests galore of varying fascination dealing with individuals at this time living in this place. It's very easy when creating a world rooted in history to not create characters that fit that world. It's important that many people we meet during our adventures feel like products of the times they live in. They can't be privy to knowledge they shouldn't have. Just like Henry begins his journey as an illiterate peasant until we cure that, we need a world full of individuals who make that default state more common than not. As such, I'm not of the belief the vast majority of characters I meet know how to read, and their knowledge and experience feels directed by the world. I don't find myself wondering if some random character has access to Google. An ultimately forgivable break in immersion, especially in more fantasy titles, that exists to bridge inconvenient knowledge gaps between somebody living in a medieval world and somebody living in a contemporary one. There's no leeway for that here. Every character needs to be a product of their time. As such, dialogue often begins with phrases like "Jesus Christ be praised." You could be the most devout Christian known to man. If you did that in a modern setting, it would be a ridiculous greeting. 600 years ago, sensibilities were different. The influence of Christianity would be much more absolute than it is today. You wouldn't think twice about a God be with you. After all, cordiality looked vastly different 600 years ago. The very social structure of this world is different to ours. It's a rigid hereditary hierarchy. More often than not, your place in such a world is your place. There's nothing you can do about that. The people occupying such a world will naturally see life differently to you or me. That's surely true of our protagonist Henry or any other characters we meet. When being exposed to so many different characters, it's easy and forgivable to stumble in the authenticity department of portraying the lives of people who would occupy this world. And I'm just pleased there are no instances where a character's behaviours took me out of that immersion. As for the actual content of the content, at times it can get a bit fetchy. Go kill some bandits, collect their spurs, collect their ears, get paid. Go poaching, collect X amount of hare meat, travel across the map to collect some shite and come back. Or gather X from this person, Y from someone else, and Z from somebody else, return to the beginning for the quest to abruptly end. These are vague allusions to some of the more fetchy quest structures that can be seen, but that is nowhere near all this world has to offer. There's nothing wrong with the occasional fetch quest, it's just something to mindlessly do every so often, provided there's plenty of more to actually stimulate the player. It's a non-issue. There are plenty of instances where Kingdom Come Deliverance proves it has more to offer than just generic traipsing. Memorably, you can aid Sir Hans with his shenanigans. Learning to read is a process, made rewarding through the fact that being able to read is actually kind of handy. Getting utterly rat-arsed with Father Godwin, clattering the lights out of the bailiff and his men, then proceeding to be unfaithful to Teresa. Honestly, naughty business sneaks up on you in this game, so it's kind of traumatic. And then delivering a sermon on Godwin's behalf while he struggles in the corner of his church with God's holiest hangover. It's technically part of the main story, but it is missable, so I think it's valid as a memorable bit of world accenting. Of course, you can romance Teresa as well, which is a great bit of humanization for Henry. It's also a great way to reliably, regularly get free repairs for your clothing, so certainly worthwhile doing from an entirely gameplay perspective if nothing else. Henry and Teresa have good chemistry for the whole few quests where it shows up. It's heartwarming even if built on shared trauma and introduces gaslighting as a game mechanic. Then there's repaying Lady Stephanie's kindness, which is awkwardly memorable. The wife of the childless, old and infirm Sir Divish, Lady Stephanie is sympathetic and kind to Henry from very early. So naturally, after having romanced Teresa, I didn't think much of returning to Talmberg to repay her kindness and help her out with a bit of a fetch quest. So imagine my horror when the reward for completing that quest was somewhat less platonic than I'd hoped. I would not be surprised if Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 implies Sir Divish and Lady Stephanie are expecting a child, and this literal noble cock-up is how I was introduced to the mighty alpha male perk, and if it's ever active I should probably try to avoid Teresa.
Well, Henry. The girls told me they'd seen you with those shameless wenches at the bathhouse. Is it true?
It isn't true, but the truth might just be worse. Let's just say the deliverance of my cum may or may not have altered the kingdom. This is the gaslighting feature I was talking about, by the way.
I never cheat on you. I was at the baths, but just to get cleaned up. My word of honour.
All right. But I'd rather you washed at the tub here, and not there with those loose women.
There's something evil about asking Teresa to repair your clothes immediately after that. Oh well. Other memorable activities include the Rat-Eye Tourney, though all you have to do is spam clinches and master strikes, so how memorable can it really be? That being said, it's a great environment to test your mettle and scratch the 1v1 itch. Not to mention you get paid in money and gear for winning, and get to listen to some of the most phenomenal fight banter known to man.
Cunt!
But the most genuinely memorable thing to come out of the arena is our confrontation with Black Peter. Should we beat him here, he'll ambush us on the road outside the mill, and we have to put this nasty piece of work to the sword. I like that not everyone took my winning of the tourney well. I won't pretend the encounter is somehow deep, but it's born off the back of players' previous actions, and we're left to imagine that this Black Peter has tried this before. So we're not just dispatching a butthurt knight, but also, potentially, a prolific murderer, whose clothes are now mine. And this is just scratching the surface of this game's random encounters. Granted, most of them are a variety of bandit or human attacks, and considering their reliable frequency, I actually started using them to get more footage of the combat system. In a game that's meant to prioritise combat, it's not a bad thing that it looks for many opportunities to put you in it, Early game, it makes travelling dangerous, but in the late game, because you revel in the combat, you'll never have to go too long without it if you want it. Of course, there are means to avoid the smoke if you don't, but these ambushes and skirmishes do scratch an itch that would otherwise go unscratched. Then there are the duels we can be challenged to at the roadside by more upstanding knights, shall we say. There was this nervy guy who challenged me to a duel early on, so naturally I spilled his blood for king and country. And then I repetitively encountered a wandering warrior more or less in the same place every few days who continuously offered me a wager for the duel for a piece of expensive armour that he seemed to have infinity of, so as you can imagine he became a money-making exploit of mine. Furthermore, not every encounter out in the sticks results in a fight. Sometimes you might happen upon a wandering pilgrim, or a guy who really likes to give you riddles. The point being, there's stuff to be getting on with even if often it's rudimentary. I also really enjoyed the catharsis of going hunting after I learned to aim the bow properly, which is still up for debate. I swear some of these arrows hit and the rabbit just seems unaffected anyway. I also like that it's not as simple as just going out into the wilderness and killing animals. The animals may be owned by the Lord, and therefore killing them might be poaching. You can happen upon other poachers. You can kill other poachers. You can take their stuff. You can play Farkle. You can engage with archery challenges. And if being an upstanding member of society is too much hassle, you can resort to a life of crime. I committed a lot of crimes playing this game. Oddly, they were largely localized to the Sasau monastery. I am woefully unpopular with the clergy, but one of my favourite deeds of criminal deviousness did not occur in the monastery at all. It occurred in the tavern outside it. I just got done battering Robin Hood of all people at the boozer, and I cleaned him out so hard I imagine Little John is going to have to start selling feet pictures. After him, I found a merchant who was willing to play a friendly game of dice, and I noticed he had 3 gold die, and I thought, wouldn't those be nice to have in the arsenal? So I waited for everybody to go to bed, snuck into his room, made sure he was unconscious, and took the die from his sleeping body. I also took his money. While we're at it, I jimmied open his chest and took his clothes as well. So as you can imagine, dice the next day was very interesting. A truly 10 out of 10 game moment. I imagine also using the livestock surrounding the monastery as target practice didn't help my reputation here, but I still choose to believe they don't like me because they're jealous of my superior dice abilities. All in all, I had buckets of fun with Kingdom Come Deliverance's world. There are ways it could have improved. For instance, when I get a notification telling me I've discovered an interesting site, it would likely be helpful if that site was interesting. But this game's main problem area was its polish. It's entirely playable, so perhaps this is more amusement than any scathing criticism. But this game possesses the refine of a trainee gastroenterologist. The combat is no stranger to bugging out and throwing immortal foes at you. Some guys will just sprint at you and keep doing that without ever attacking, they just kind of get in the way. On top of that, there's a seeming never-ending list of quizzical bugs. For instance, the mass of men. Fast travel unavoidably being interrupted by encounters that don't happen. Inexplicable random loading screens. On multiple occasions, the simulation fell apart. Well, it's either that or I've been eating the wrong mushrooms. Fellas, what are you doing to this poor horse? It's been a while since the last time I fell through the world in a game. It's honestly quite refreshing. But I like to say this, no game's perfect, and bugs never get in the way of a fantastic game. When it's truly brilliant, a few little errors here and there can be forgiven. And that's all it is. The game was stable, it didn't crash often. I had to restart it to reload the matrix at times, but it was more than happy to allow me to continue playing in a deteriorating reality. And my god, what a fantastic experience Kingdom Come Deliverance is. I was wrong about this game. Back in 2018, I hated it. That was me being an idiot. My stupidity is obvious now. This has become a fast favourite. It isn't at the top of the list, but it is on the list. Kingdom Come Deliverance is incredible. I have loved every second of my over 100 hour long playthrough. Well, maybe not every second. Being a monk kinda sucked. But the point is, I used to think I'd never understand this game, and now I absolutely, utterly adore it. It's nowhere near as slow, drab, nor painful as it first seems. It's simply a game that demands you respect it by requiring the player to play it attentively. If you cure yourself of the slop game mentality, it's just as easy, if not easier, than The Witcher 3. It's not a game about difficulty, it's a game about caution and routine. It's about going the long way and developing Henry. As a result, the game offers one of the most satisfying progression systems I can think of, and that very progression system goes hand in hand with a brilliant coming-of-age story. One that doesn't escalate to 11 simply because it's cool. Everything that happens occurs because it's been earned. It's a game that stays true to its vision of authenticity, and that very authenticity sets this game apart from the vast majority of other games on the market. You could 100% describe this game as flawed, but it's unapologetically what it's set out to be, striking a realistic balance between fun and tedium in ways that only enhance the game and make it better. The reason why I was addicted to this game after I got into it properly was because it felt like a pure adventure. It's a game doing its own thing, not striving to be a market replacement for something else as many games seemingly exist to be. It offers something so particular it has no real competition, and comparison can only serve to highlight how different an experience it is. With that in mind, I've fallen in love with Come Deliverance, so you can absolutely expect to see me diving into the second one at my earliest convenience. I'm hooked. I can't describe how eager I am to find out what happens next in Henry's journey. All I know is at least I'll only be a year late to that one. Yes, I've already started it, but I'm not very deep, and all I've really done is pick flowers to make money. But this is where I'm going to have to leave this video. So long, and thanks for all the chickens. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. It would be massively appreciated. And of course, if you made it to the back end of the video and fancy joining our Discord server, if you use the QR code on screen now, you would be most welcome. It's a modest place, there aren't many people there, and honestly, I like building it up slowly, so I control ingress this way because primarily I'm pretentious, but also because it cultivates a more respectful community. After all, everyone in there has watched a lengthy video of mine, so in watching a video to its end, you've earned the right to rank among them. I suppose it's up to you to distinguish if I've earned the privilege of your company. But look, no pressure, I get it, you just want to watch long YouTube videos and fall asleep. I understand. Nevertheless, the offer is there, but look, I hope to be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, hopefully on Come Deliverance 2. And with any luck, that'll be soonish. But until next time, please take care, and goodbye.